Hello, my name's Paul Edwards. Welcome to Man Friendly Church, a channel dedicated to bringing equality back into the house of God so we have an equal number of men and women. We do this in two ways. First, by understanding how men and women actually do think differently. And second, by promoting methods that encourage men to attend and become part of the local church. Recently, I was asked to preach a sermon in our series on the names of God on Jehovah Jireh. Having been in church for many years, I'd heard this sermon many times. So I was a little bit, but I actually went and studied the word. Always a good thing to do when you're going to preach. And I found when I studied it, that the Bible doesn't actually teach that it's just a laid back, we go, we pray to God, he supplies all our needs, and all you need is prayer and faith, and Shazam, God's going to do everything. That is very much a female-friendly way of preaching this sermon. And you can kind of make it say that if you're trying to build up on the security and everything about God. But when I actually read it, that wasn't what I saw. I didn't see that Abraham did nothing and God just supplied the ram the way I've always heard it. I actually read it and came across a much more male-centric way of preaching this sermon. Jehovah Jireh for men. It's much more when you read it that we pray, God speaks, we do something that God tells us to do, and God provides through our actions. Yes, there's still the miraculous of God, but God's calling us to do something about it. It's not just lay back and let God do all the work. Then I looked at this sermon, comparing it to the recent series on man-friendly sermons. I hadn't used any very clever religious phrases. I'd used pictures throughout. I'd actually brought in a practical example of how it affected me in my life. There were practical things you could do. I love the KISS principle, keep it simple, stupid. And I had all through the sermon. And it was short and sweet. It was about a 20-minute sermon. So I just challenge you, watch this sermon. Look out for the subtitles at the bottom explaining how this ties in with my rules for making your sermon man-friendly. Hopefully you can pick up something. And of course, if you're just a man coming to find a man-friendly version of the Jehovah Jireh teaching, you will enjoy it anyway. But if you stay tuned at the end, I've got some practical principles how to put this into your preaching. So now, handing over to myself to preach. Hello, my name's Paul. I'm here today to talk about one of the names of God, Jehovah Jireh. This is such a famous name that when I was a kid, we even had a song about it. But on special request from all of my church, I'm not going to sing that to you today. However, I'm going to start off by telling you a story about a guy named Dave. Now, Dave had a problem. His town was flooding. And being a Christian, Dave thought, I'm going to pray. So he got before God and he's praying, God, save me from this flood. I need you to provide help for me. I need you to provide a solution. So he's praying. And there's this sound outside the window. A guy is yelling, come, I can get you out of here. He looks out and he sees a guy in a rowing boat. And he's saying, no, hold on a minute. I'm praying, God's going to save me. Go away. So the guy goes away. He's back there, he's praying. And there's another sound. Now Dave's getting irritated. Look, I'm asking God to save me and people keep annoying me. So he goes out and there's a guy this time in a motorboat. Look, go away, I'm praying, God's going to save me. And he goes back in. Then there's this really loud cluttering sound. We all know the sound. It's a helicopter. There's a rescue helicopter there. And he's here to help Dave. And it's like, Dave's saying, no, go away, I'm praying, God is going to save me. God promised to supply my needs. So the helicopter flies away. And then Dave is there praying, it's him and God. And nothing happens. The water comes up. Dave doesn't make it. He makes it and he's standing before God in heaven and he's saying to God, God, I prayed for you to save me and you let me drown. And God says, what more did you want? I sent you a rowing boat. I sent you a motorboat. I even sent you a helicopter to rescue you. And you turned them all away. Sometimes we're like that with God. We decide how God is going to supply our needs. And God works on it in a slightly different way. We're going to look now at the story where Abraham named God as Jehovah Jireh, his provider. Genesis 22, starting at verse 1. Now it came about after these things that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham! And he said, Here I am. He said, Take now your son, your only son whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I tell you. So Abraham arose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him, and Isaac his son. And he split the wood for the burnt offering, and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. On the 3rd day, Abraham raised his eyes and saw the place from a distance. Abraham said to his young men, You stay here with the donkey, and I and the lad will go over there, and we will worship and return to you. Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son. And he took in his hand the fire and the knife. So the 2 of them walked on together. Isaac spoke to Abraham his father and said, My father. And he said, Here I am, my son. And he said, Behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Abraham said, God will provide for himself the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. So the 2 of them walked on together. Then they came to the place of which God had told him, and Abraham built the altar there, and arranged the wood, and bound his son Isaac, and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Abraham stretched out his hands and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. He said, Do not stretch out your hand against the lad. Do nothing to him, for now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. Then Abraham raised his eyes and looked, and behold, before him a ram caught in the thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered him up for a burnt offering in the place of his son. Abraham called the name of that place, The Lord Will Provide. And that is where the name Jehovah Jireh comes. As it is said to this day, in the mount of the Lord it will be provided. Before we go any further with this story, I just want to be very clear. At no point did God ever intend for Isaac to die. How do I know that? Well, later in the Bible, in the book of Jeremiah 32, at verse 35, God says, when he's talking about the children of Israel and the things they've done that he didn't like, they built the high places of Baal, a false god, in the valley of the son of Hinnom, to offer up their sons and daughters to Molech, though I did not command them, nor did it even enter my mind, that they should do this abomination to cause Judah to sin. So from the beginning, it is clear God did not want human sacrifice. So please don't misunderstand this story. It's not about God wanting sacrifice. It's about God wanting men to trust him and to do what he says. When you start reading this story and then read on through the stories in the Bible, you find that there's a theme that goes through whenever people have a need. And I want to compare it a little bit with the theme. Anybody like Tom Cruise? If you go through some of Tom Cruise's early films, there seems to be a real theme that goes through a lot of his films. I'll just pick 3. Let's start with Top Gun. Now, with Top Gun, Tom Cruise, his character was a fighter pilot. In fact, he was a pretty good fighter pilot. At some point, he loses his edge as a fighter pilot. And then a girl, a pretty lady, comes and helps him get his edge back. We have a happy ending. And then there's Cocktail. Now in Cocktail, Tom Cruise is a cocktail maker. In fact, he's a pretty good cocktail maker. But something happens. He loses his edge as a cocktail maker. A pretty girl comes along. He gets his edge back with her help. We have a happy ending again. Days of Thunder. Now you might notice the theme running here. Tom Cruise was a racing driver. He was a pretty good racing driver. He loses his edge as a racing driver. A girl helps him get his edge back. We have a happy ending. This theme goes through. It's a way of working. It's proven method in designing film stories that works. There is a way that God works when it comes to God providing. There is a recurring theme in the way God answered prayer and actually supplied people's needs in the Bible. We've just looked at the story of Abraham and Isaac. God spoke to him and told him to do something different to what he expected. He turned round. God had surprised a ram, but Abraham still had to go over, pick the ram up, bring it back and use that instead of his son. He had to hear God and do something. And then we go forward. The nation of Israel have left Egypt. They've been chased out. They've left in a hurry. They're running out of food. You've got thousands, tens of thousands of people in the desert needing to eat. And they're praying. They weren't just praying though, they were a little bit unsubtle with it. In Exodus 16, starting at verse 2, the whole congregation of the sons of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. The sons of Israel said to them, "Would that we had died by the Lord's hand in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots of meat, when we ate bread to the full. For you have brought us out into the wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I may test them, whether or not they will walk in my instruction." So we come back. This is the children of Israel walking in a desert. They have a need. They need God to supply food. God told them about the manna. He told them where to go and find it. But they had to go out. They had to pick up the manna. They had to bring it back. They had to eat it. So God spoke to them, told them what to do. They responded. They were fed. And then we find another story. We have a woman who's just lost her husband. Not only has she lost her husband, he's left a lot of debt behind. And the people she owes money to are coming, and because she's got no money, they're going to take her sons. This is terrible. It says in 2 Kings chapter 4, "Now a certain woman of the wives of the sons of the prophets cried out to Elisha, 'Your servant my husband is dead, and you know that your servant feared the Lord, and the creditor has come to take my 2 children to be his slaves.' Elisha said to her, 'What shall I do for you? Tell me, what do you have in the house?' And she said, 'Your maidservant has nothing in the house except just a jar of oil.' Then he said, 'Go and borrow vessels at large for yourself from all your neighbours, even empty vessels. Do not get a few. And you shall go in and shut the door behind you and your sons, and pour out all these vessels, and you shall set aside what is full.' So she went from him and shut the door behind her and her sons. They were bringing the vessels to her, and she poured. When the vessels were full, she said to her son, 'Bring me another vessel.' And he said to her, 'There is not one vessel more.' And the oil stopped. Then she came and told the man of God, and he said, 'Go and sell the oil and pay your debt, and you and your sons can live on the rest.' So this lady with her debts, her problems, she needs help. She goes to the man of God, and the reply comes from God to go and do something. Get some containers, bring them back, fill them with oil, and then sell them. She does that. But there's the theme we see all the way through. You pray, God speaks, you do something, God provides. The trouble is, we don't want prayer to work this way. we have a better idea on how God should answer prayer. What we want is we'll go and we'll pray. We tell God what our need is. Shazam! A genie appears and grants us our wish. All our needs are met. But that's not what we see in the Bible. That's not how I see God working. Occasionally, we see God move when someone prays and something miraculous happens immediately. But what much more often happens is, as in the Bible, we tell God we have a need. We then listen to God. God does some of the work in the background. Maybe he finds a ram, he makes some manna, he creates oil, whatever it is God does. And then instead of going and giving us the genie to make everything happen, God answers us, tells us what to do. Maybe look around to see the ram. Maybe it's go and get as many things as you can to put the oil in. Or maybe go and get some food from the desert, pick it up. Or maybe you need more money. And God says, I found a job for you. Apply for this job, send your CV. And you suddenly find you've got a better job. Or maybe you need a job and God shows you where to look for the job. God speaks to us. We then do what God says. And do you know, it's so amazing. God supplies our needs, but he makes his supplies, he gives us work in his way, not our way. Which do you think is more likely to work when you have a need next time? That the genie's going to come along and Shazam, everything's going to work? Or is it that you're going to need to spend time with God, hear what he says, do what he says, put it into action and see God move? People say to me, I'm praying, but God's not supplying my needs. Why is not God responding to my prayer? Well, first thing we need to look at is this just a want? Occasionally God will answer a want, but it's not often. This is the confidence we have before him, it says in 1 John 5, verses 14 to 15. That if we ask according to his will, he hears us, and if we know that he hears us in whatever we ask, we know that we have the requests which we have asked from him. Notice there it says if we ask in accordance with his will. His will is always to supply our needs because he loves us, he cares. But his will is not always to give us what we want. When we see children that always get what they want, we look on them as spoilt brats. We see the kid who says, I want, and mummy immediately or daddy immediately gives him what he wants. It becomes a spoilt brat. And sometimes we expect God to give us just whatever we want. But I want to say, if you're saying God's not supplying my needs and it's just something you want, then I want to tell you, your question isn't relevant because you're not talking about needs, you're talking about wants. And occasionally, God has a bigger plan than what we think we need. Sometimes God sees something bigger. A good few years ago, my business was in trouble and I didn't have money. I'd run up a lot of debts on credit cards. And I was praying and saying, God, I need to do something. And so I went out and I found somebody to do a mortgage that would take all my debts and my credit cards, roll them into one package, and I'd have one big mortgage. It was less to pay every month. I could afford that. But for some reason, when I'm praying, God says to me, no, don't do it. That is not my will for you. I didn't understand it. But I did what God said. I heard God. I responded. If I had taken that mortgage, I would have lost my house. Because soon after that, interest rates went up. We had big debts. But interest rates only went up in one way. My mortgage was tied to the interest rate, which was the Bank of England rate, and that never changed. So my mortgage actually was very low. I was able to continue paying my debts. If I'd have done it my way, if I'd have not listened to God, I would have lost out. I would have lost my house. God had a bigger picture. So sometimes we need to be aware of that bigger picture. Are you praying in the wrong way? Are you just looking for the genie to come and Shazam, answer your prayer? It occasionally happens, But if I'm honest, I think you're more likely to actually get some money from that prince in Nigeria who's told you you've won $1 million. That's about as likely. Yes, it is theoretically possible, but I rarely see God move that way. Then I want to ask you a question. When you're praying to God about your needs, what you need God to supply, is this a one-way prayer time or is it two-way? What do I mean a one-way prayer time? Are you saying, God, I need you to do this? Or are you saying, God, I have a need. How do I work through this? What do you want me to do? Which one do you think fits the theme of where we've been talking about? Then I ask you another question if your needs haven't been met. Has God spoken to you? And if he has, are you doing what he said? If we're doing nothing on our part, we can't blame God for not doing his. The children of Israel could not have blamed God if they were hungry and they hadn't gone out to collect the manna. The woman couldn't have blamed God for losing her children if she hadn't got any pots, if she hadn't poured the oil. So I ask the question, is your needs not being met? Your lack of action? Because then you can do something about that. And it may be you're thinking, well, I'm trying to do all of this, but God's still not answered my prayer. I'm still not seeing anything move. Well, in business terms, we actually have companies which are what they call JIT suppliers, J-I-T. Stands for just in time, and they are never late. God tends, for some reason only he knows, maybe he's testing our faith, but God delivers on time, but how often is it just in time? We believe we have a faithful God. He will deliver our needs, but it may not be immediately when we want it. So, how do we work with God as he supplies our needs? First of all, focus on the things you need. Bring the things that you need. Don't spend all your time asking God if you can win the lottery. Decide before you start praying that you're going to listen. And this is not a one-way prayer time. Decide you're going to work with what God says. As you sit to pray, make your prayer a conversation. Allow time to sit and hear God after you pray. As God speaks to you to do something, then, well, guess what? Do something. The widow lady who had no oil, she had no pots. And then trust God. As you do your part, trust God. He will deliver it. It may only be just in time, but God is faithful. He's never rushed. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that sermon. If you want to do something useful with this, my suggestion is start off, watch the whole series, Man-Friendly Sermons, which you can find on my channel. There's a complete playlist. Then the next challenge is find 2 of your most recent sermons. Compare them to the rules and the tips in my series and see do you meet them. You're probably going to find you do in some areas and you don't in others. So then the next part is decide what needs to change in the way you preach to make your sermons more man-friendly. And the thing is, it's no good deciding what needs to change. You've then got to get out and change it. So my challenge is find the differences and then do something about it and improve your way to make your sermons more man-friendly. If you like this teaching today, please click on the like button. It helps YouTube recommend it to other people. But also subscribe and you'll pick up more teaching as it comes along. And it always helps, recommend it to someone else. You might find some other people being more man-friendly in the way they present their church. Thank you very much and God bless.